A German shepherd lies motionless in the snow, no collar, no name, no sound. Her breath is shallow, her eyes still waiting. Everyone walked past, except one. Why did she wait so long? And what was she waiting for, if no one was coming? The city of Lilleholm slept under a suffocating silence, blanketed by thick snow that muffled every sound and stole every color from the world. Streetlights flickered dimly, casting long, trembling shadows on the icy pavement, the kind of night that made even the warmest thoughts feel cold. Liv Haldorsen, 38, wrapped her wool coat tighter around her lean frame, her boots crunching against the frozen sidewalk. Tall and willowy, with pale Nordic features and a sharp, aquiline nose, she walked with the quiet grace of someone used to staying unnoticed. Her ash-blonde hair was pulled into a loose bun, streaked with a few premature strands of silver that she never bothered to dye. She had once been known for her laughter. Her students at the Fine Arts High School remembered her as bright, enthusiastic, someone who wore earrings made of hand-painted clay and smelled faintly of linseed oil. But that was before the divorce, before the gallery closed, before silence became her closest companion. Now, Liv taught evening classes to make ends meet, walking home past the shuttered shops of Lilleholm's old quarter, always alone, always tired. As she turned the corner onto Solgaten Street, where her modest apartment building sat like a hunched beast beneath snow-heavy eaves, something caught the corner of her eye. A dark, unmoving shape in the alley between her building and the bakery next door. At first, she thought it was a trash bag, one of many that piled up during the snowbound weeks. But then it shifted, barely perceptibly, and Liv stopped. Her breath curled in the air, fogging her glasses slightly. She took a cautious step closer, heart thudding in her ears. There, curled in a tight crescent on the snowbank, was a dog. A German shepherd by the look of it, though far smaller than one should have been. Its fur, once a noble blend of black and tan, was now matted with slush and ice, ribs poking through the thin coat like blades. Its legs were tucked beneath its body, as if trying to hold what little warmth remained, and its tail was limp, barely twitching. But what struck Liv most was the eyes. Half-lidded, glassy, and full of a deep, quiet despair. Eyes that looked like they had waited too long for someone who never came. No collar, no tags. Just pain. Liv stood still, torn. She had no business taking in strays. Her apartment was small, her salary stretched thin. She had only just finished paying off the heating repairs from last month. And yet, those eyes. A gust of wind swept through the alley, and the dog let out a small, involuntary whimper. Liv felt something shift inside her. That sound. It was too much. She crouched down slowly, mindful not to startle the animal. "Hey," she whispered, her voice soft, as though speaking to a memory. "Can you hear me?" The dog didn't lift its head, but one ear flicked. Liv removed her scarf, warm, woolen, hand-knitted by her mother, back when she still remembered how, and draped it gently over the dog's body. The creature flinched at the contact, but didn't resist. It was too far gone for fear, or hope. "You're freezing," she murmured, biting her lip. "God, you're freezing." As she reached into her bag with numb fingers to retrieve her phone, her mind flashed through 100 practical reasons why this was a mistake. Vet bills, rent, time, emotional risk. But none of them weighed more than the fragile life at her feet. The local animal control wouldn't be open this late, and she didn't trust the emergency shelter in the outskirts. No, if she wanted this dog to live, she would have to act now. "I'm going to take you home," she said, more to herself than the dog. "Just until we figure things out." The dog made no sound as Liv gently slid her arms under its body. It was shockingly light, barely more than a sack of bones wrapped in fur. The scarf fell from its shoulders as she lifted it, but Liv kept one hand wrapped around its back, cradling the limp creature like a lost child. The walk to her building was short, but each step felt heavier with the weight of everything unspoken. The pain the dog carried. The silence Liv had lived with for too long. 2 ghosts passing through snow. Her apartment on the first floor smelled faintly of eucalyptus and turpentine. A few unfinished paintings leaned against the walls. She hadn't touched them in weeks. The heater hummed in the corner like a tired breath. She laid the dog on a folded blanket near the radiator, careful not to jostle it too much. It didn't stir, but its shallow breaths puffed faint clouds into the air. Liv brought out a shallow bowl of water and placed it beside it. The dog sniffed weakly but didn't drink. "Okay," Liv said, standing over it, arms crossed, unsure what came next. "Okay, you're safe now." She sat on the nearby armchair, staring at the bundle on her floor. It was a strange feeling, this quiet company. Heavy, but not unpleasant. Across the room her eyes fell on a drawing pinned to her fridge, a pencil sketch of a dog sitting alone in the snow, its back turned to the viewer, tail curled around its paws. The style was unmistakable. Astrid. One of her quieter students, Astrid was 13, with a long braid, perpetually hunched shoulders, and eyes that never quite met yours when she spoke. She barely said a word in class, but her drawing spoke volumes, raw, aching images of animals alone in landscapes too big for them. Astrid often stayed behind after class, pretending to tidy her brushes while sneaking glances at Liv's hands when she mixed paint. There was something in the girl's silence that mirrored Liv's own. The sketch on the fridge was from just last week. Liv had kept it, unable to explain why. She looked from the drawing to the dog, to the real version, now breathing, barely, on her living room floor. "Freya," she said aloud. The name came to her without hesitation, like it had been waiting. A name of a warrior goddess, one who endured, one who stayed behind. The dog didn't respond, but Liv repeated the name anyway. "You're Freya now. That's who you are." She leaned back in the chair, exhausted, the hum of the heater soft in her ears. Outside, snow continued to fall, silent and steady, and for the first time in a long while, Liv didn't feel quite so alone. The next morning, the city of Lilholm awoke under a dull pewter sky. Snow clung to rooftops like thick icing, and icicles dangled from balconies like silent daggers. Liv Halldorsen stood by her kitchen window, fingers wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, watching the breath of the city rise faintly from chimneys. Behind her, Freya lay curled on the blanket by the radiator, still motionless except for the slow, shallow rise and fall of her ribs. The name had settled in Liv's mind like snow on a ledge, quiet, certain. Freya. A name that carried weight, a name that felt like armor for a creature so fragile. Liv hadn't slept much. She had checked on Freya every hour, whispering small reassurances and draping extra towels across her body. It was clear the dog needed more than warmth and water. There was a tightness in Freya's breathing that worried her, a stiffness in the limbs, and something else, something unseen but deeply felt, like the echo of a wound too old to bleed. She grabbed her coat and slipped on her boots, packing a towel and blanket into a reusable tote. "We're going to see someone," she murmured as she gently scooped Freya into her arms. The dog whimpered slightly but didn't resist. It was as if she understood. The vet clinic was a 15-minute walk through slushy sidewalks and salt-stained streets. Freya lay quietly in Liv's lap on the tram ride, wrapped in layers like a fragile parcel. No one else on the tram gave more than a cursory glance. Lilholmers were used to people keeping their burdens to themselves. The clinic was a small gray building nestled between a laundry service and a florist. A green paw print sign hung above the door, half buried in frost. As Liv stepped inside, she was greeted by warm air tinged with antiseptic and animal musk. Behind the reception desk sat a tall woman with short copper hair and angular features. Her name tag read Nina. She wore a burgundy fleece and had the calm air of someone used to emergencies. "Can I help you?" "I found her last night," Liv said softly, nodding towards Freya. "She's starving, exhausted. I don't know how long she's been out there." Nina's eyes softened. "You did the right thing bringing her in. Dr. Bergman's free in 10. Let me take her back for triage." Liv hesitated but nodded. As Freya disappeared behind the door, something in her chest tightened, an unexpected surge of protectiveness. She didn't have long to wait. Within minutes, Nina returned and waved her toward the back. The examination room was stark and bright, the smell of disinfectant stronger here. Freya lay on a raised steel table, still wrapped in the towel. Beside her stood Dr. Elias Bergman. He was in his early 60s, tall but slightly stooped, with deep lines around his eyes and a trimmed gray beard. His white coat hung open over a sweater the color of slate. His hands were large and square, and he moved with a deliberate gentleness that contrasted with the sternness in his expression. "You're the one who brought her in?" he asked without looking up. "Yes, I'm Liv Halldorsen." "Good instincts," She wouldn't have survived another night. He examined Freya's limbs, checking her joints, lifting each paw with practiced care. She's severely malnourished, borderline hypothermic, but what's most interesting, he gestured to Freya's shoulders, is her muscle retention. You see this? He pressed gently on her flank. These aren't the bones of a stray. She was strong once, trained. Liv frowned. Trained how? Dr. Bergman pointed toward Freya's neck. There's scar tissue here, subtle but consistent with long-term wear of a tight training collar. Not a pet's, professional, military or police maybe. He turned toward a small machine on the counter. Let's see if she's chipped. Liv watched as he scanned Freya's shoulder. A small beep echoed in the room. Got something. He tapped at the keyboard. After a moment, he squinted at the screen. Well, he said, voice quieter, her name isn't Freya. Liv felt a strange pang. She's registered as Ziva, belonged to an Arvid Nystrom, retired military, local. He turned to Liv. It says she was reported missing 9 months ago. Her owner passed away 2 weeks after that. Car accident. Liv blinked. So she was looking for him all this time? Looks like it, Bergman sighed, straightening his back. What we're seeing is more than neglect. This dog has been grieving. There was silence in the room. Ziva, Freya, let out a low, trembling breath. She must have been taken, Liv said slowly. There's no way a dog like this just vanishes. Bergman nodded. Maybe. Or maybe someone tried to take her and failed. Dogs like her don't give in easily. Liv reached out and gently touched Ziva's ear. It twitched under her fingers. What happens now? She asked. I'd like to keep her for monitoring. Start fluids, check for infections. She needs slow refeeding. You can visit, but... He paused. If you're thinking of adopting her, we'll need to transfer ownership. Liv swallowed. I think I already have. He gave her a faint smile, more of a shift in his eyes than his mouth. We'll keep her warm. As Liv left the clinic, the cold air hit her like a slap. But something had changed. The weight she carried felt less like burden and more like responsibility. Back at school, later that day, Liv found a slip of paper on her desk, folded neatly. No name. Inside, a pencil drawing. A German shepherd sitting on a battlefield, its eyes turned upward to a sky full of smoke. Beneath the image, a single line was written in block letters. A warrior no longer called by name. Liv knew the style instantly. Astrid, her quiet student who always sat in the back and never raised her hand. She looked out the classroom window at the snow-covered yard. A shadow moved near the trees, likely just a crow, but for a moment, Liv thought she saw a shape curled beneath the bare branches. She tucked the drawing into her sketchbook and closed it gently, like sealing a secret. That night, she sat beside the radiator again, fingers tracing the now empty blanket. Ziva wasn't home yet, but she would be. And when she returned, Liv would call her by her true name, because now she understood. Sometimes a name wasn't just a label. Sometimes it was the beginning of healing. The early morning fog hung over Little Home like a breath held too long, soft and damp and unwilling to lift. Liv Haldorsen sat at the small wooden table in her kitchen, the light from the window silvering her cheekbones and turning her coffee lukewarm. She hadn't touched it. Her thoughts had returned to the name, Ziva, and the man behind it, Arvid Nystrom. A name that, since the visit to Dr. Bergman, had clung to her like wet snow. Liv had spent most of the night researching, her laptop humming in the dark while Freya, Ziva, rested under the vet's care. She had found only a handful of mentions of Arvid online, a few old news articles, one from a local veterans event, his face solemn beneath a flag, short-cropped gray hair, a weathered brow. Standing beside him, on a leash, was Ziva, young, proud, her ears pointed and alert. That photograph stayed with Liv long after she closed the lid of her computer. Later that day, wrapped in her heavy coat and scarf, Liv made her way toward Norrvallen, a quieter, older district in the north of the city. The buildings here were brick-faced and wind-worn, their windows shuttered against the cold. Arvid had lived here, according to city records. A top-floor apartment on Kullavagen 17, now listed as vacant. The door to the building was locked, but a woman stepped out just as Liv approached. She was in her 60s, stout, bundled in a thick green parka, with tufts of gray hair poking out from under her fur-lined hood. Her name, as Liv would quickly learn, was Mrs. Eleanor Skov, a long-time resident with a habit of talking even when no one asked. "You're looking for Arvid?" she asked, squinting behind thick glasses as Liv mentioned the name. He was a quiet one, lived alone, walked that dog of his like clockwork. Morning, afternoon, evening. You'd think she was his only family. Liv nodded. She was. I found her. Recently. Eleanor's eyes widened, and for a moment the wind seemed to stop. "You found Ziva? She's alive. She's recovering. Well, I'll be..." Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "We all thought she died out there. Poor girl." Liv hesitated. "I heard he died not long after she disappeared." Eleanor's expression turned somber. "Terrible thing. Car hit him a few blocks from the station. They said he was headed to the precinct to follow up on her disappearance. Had been calling shelters, putting up flyers. He never gave up on her. And then," she shook her head, "he died still looking." The words settled in Liv's chest like ice. She thanked the woman and continued down toward the train station, a grim sense of purpose building within her. Something didn't add up. Ziva hadn't just run away. She had been taken. At the edge of the station's freight yard, Liv met Hugo Lind, a freight operator in his late 40s, wide-shouldered and affable, with a scruffy beard and grease-stained gloves. He had responded to her online post looking for information. "I remember her," he said, leaning against a stack of pallets. "Big shepherd, dark coat. Saw her about 10 months ago near the loading zone. She wasn't with the old man. She was with someone else." "Someone else?" Liv asked, heart quickening. "Yeah, guy looked off. Young, maybe 30s, jumpy as hell. I thought it was weird. Ziva didn't walk like she knew him. She kept pulling at the leash. And then," he chuckled dryly, "she just snapped it, bolted, straight into the trees near the tracks. Guy chased her for maybe 20 seconds before giving up. Hopped into some battered white van and sped off." "Did you report it?" "I did. But by then the dog was gone, and no one was too interested. Just a stolen pet, they said." Liv stood quietly for a moment, trying to imagine it. Ziva running, heart pounding, snow stinging her eyes, the leash flapping behind her, escaping captivity only to lose her home forever. She thanked Hugo and made her way back through the snowy city streets, the story piecing itself together like a frayed quilt. Ziva had been stolen, perhaps by someone looking to sell or exploit a trained dog. But she had escaped, and in her desperation to find her way home, she had wandered too far, too long, until memory and instinct gave way to survival. Later that afternoon, Liv returned to the school, still wearing her coat. The hallways smelled of paper and chalk dust, and the chatter of students echoed faintly from the distant art rooms. She made her way to her classroom and stopped short when she saw something sitting on her desk. A sheet of thick sketch paper, a pencil drawing in dark, confident strokes. It was Ziva, not the fragile version wrapped in blankets. No, this was a warrior. The dog stood atop a snowy hill, her ears upright, her eyes fierce and focused, staring out over a windswept plain. At her paws lay a torn leash, and behind her, the fading shape of a man. Just a silhouette, mid-step, as if walking away. Beneath the drawing was a title, "The Warrior Who Ran Toward the Silence." Liv turned it over. No name, but she didn't need one. Astrid. Astrid was 13, thin, with long dark hair always tied in a single braid down her back. She wore oversized sweaters and never made eye contact when she spoke. Liv had watched her for months, always drawing, always silent. But something had changed lately. Her eyes were less guarded, her lines more deliberate. Later, Liv found her in the back of the art room, sketching under the dim desk lamp. "I saw your drawing," Liv said gently. Astrid glanced up, startled. Then she looked down again, fingers tightening around her pencil. "You captured her strength," Liv added. Astrid said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, she spoke. "I dreamt about her, before you even brought her in. A dog waiting in the snow. She kept looking for someone, but no one came." Liv sat beside her. "She was looking for someone. Her name was Ziva. She belonged to a man who never stopped searching for her." Astrid swallowed hard, then murmured, "My mom's a nurse. She works night shifts, sometimes double. I don't see her for days. I know she's alive, but it feels like she disappears." Liv nodded. "That's a hard thing." It's easier to draw things that can't talk, Astrid said, voice flat. You don't have to wonder what they're not saying. The silence between them settled like falling snow. You're not alone, Liv said softly. Ziva isn't either, not anymore. When Liv left the school that evening, the sky had begun to clear, revealing faint stars between drifting clouds. She thought about Arvid walking toward the police station that day, hopeful, about Ziva tearing free from a stranger, about a girl who dreamed of silence and snow. Back in her apartment, she folded Astrid's drawing and placed it on the mantel. Ziva was still at the clinic, but she would come home soon. And when she did, Liv would tell her that even the ones who go missing in the snow can still be found again. The snow had begun to thaw, not fully, but enough that patches of wet pavement peeked through the slush, and the icicles on windowsills wept slowly under the morning sun. In Liv Haldorson's small apartment, the radiator hummed with gentle persistence, and by its side, Ziva, once Freya, stretched her limbs for the first time without wincing. She was healing. Each day brought small signs of recovery. A deeper breath. A tail twitch. The appetite that had been almost non-existent slowly returned, and she began to take interest in the sounds around her. The clink of Liv's mug in the sink, the rustle of fabric, the soft groan of floorboards beneath Liv's feet. But at night, it was different. Ziva would lie near the window, her ears twitching at distant sounds only she could decipher. She rarely barked, but often let out soft, keening whimpers, tiny, broken sounds that pierced the dark. Her eyes would stay fixed on the glass, as though waiting for someone to appear from the shadows of the street below. Liv tried to soothe her. She read aloud in the evenings, passages from her old art history books, stories she used to tell students. She even tried music. Ziva responded most to piano. Not joy, exactly, but a quiet, attentive stillness, like recognition. One morning, Liv clipped on Ziva's leash, adjusted her scarf, and stepped out into the cold with a new purpose. We're going back, she said softly, stroking the dog's back, just in case there's something or someone. They walked for nearly half an hour, through melting snowbanks and under trees still coated in frost. Ziva's gait had improved, her steps less uncertain, her tail now held at a modest arc behind her. Yet, with every block closer to Kullavagen, the street where Arvid had once lived, Liv noticed the dog's demeanor shift. Her ears sharpened, her pace quickened. When they reached the edge of the old apartment complex, Liv expected hesitation. Instead, Ziva surged forward, her body tense with sudden, urgent memory. At the gate, she whined, a sharp, unfamiliar sound, and scratched lightly at the rusted iron bars. The building looked unchanged, weathered brick, windows still curtained in lace. But when Liv followed Ziva around to the side entrance, she saw the name on the mailbox had been replaced. Nystrom was gone. In its place, Hjort. Ziva pressed her nose to the door frame and let out a muffled, choked sound. Liv stood in silence. The door opened unexpectedly. A man in his late 40s stepped out, wearing a turtleneck beneath a dark winter coat. He had sandy hair thinning at the temples, a clean-shaven jaw, and the stiff posture of someone unused to surprise. "Can I help you?" he asked, glancing down at Ziva. "Sorry," Liv said, holding the leash tightly. "My dog. She used to live here, with the previous tenant, Arvid Nystrom." The man blinked, then his expression softened. "Ah, the soldier. I heard he passed. This was his dog?" "Yes, her name's Ziva." He crouched slightly. "She's beautiful." Ziva didn't approach. She stood motionless, her gaze fixed on a small potted plant in the stairwell behind him. Liv followed her eyes. It was withered now, but a familiar ceramic pot held the plant, cracked near the base and painted with faded sunflowers. It had belonged to Arvid. It had been there in the photo Liv had found online. "I kept that," the man said when he noticed. "Didn't have the heart to throw it out." They left quietly a few minutes later. Ziva didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had confirmed what her instincts already knew. There was no one waiting. That night, Liv sat at the edge of her bed, brushing her fingers through Ziva's fur as the dog lay curled at her feet. "You came all this way," she whispered, "and he was already gone." Ziva shifted and pressed her head lightly against Liv's knee. Across town, in the quiet hallway of Lilholm School, a different kind of silence settled. Astrid hadn't come to class. Liv noticed the absence immediately. The girl's usual corner seat by the window was empty. No sketchbook, no braided hair draped over her shoulder. At first, Liv assumed it was illness or snow, but when she checked the front office later, the secretary shook her head. She stormed out this morning. Something happened at home. With her grandfather, I think. Concern tightened in Liv's chest. She knew little about Astrid's family, only that the girl lived with her grandfather, a retired factory worker named Einar Brandt, a stern man with thick white eyebrows and a voice that carried even when he whispered. He was known for walking Astrid to school in silence and leaving without a backward glance, a man of few words and even fewer displays of affection. By mid-afternoon, Liv stood outside their modest house near the edge of the municipal park. The building was plain, paint-chipped, garden bare in winter, smoke rising faintly from the chimney. She rang the bell and waited. Einar opened the door slowly. His frame was hunched, his eyes pale and sharp beneath a furrowed brow. He wore a flannel shirt and smelled faintly of liniment oil. "Miss Halldorson," he said, surprise flickering across his face. "Astrid's not here." "She didn't come to class," Einar sighed. "She left after breakfast. We argued. She said I don't listen, that I never ask what she's feeling." He paused, visibly uncomfortable. "I may have said she was being dramatic. Do you know where she might have gone?" "She goes to the park when she wants to disappear." Liv found Astrid sitting on a low wooden bench near the frozen pond, her coat pulled tight, sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing with short, sharp pencil strokes, eyes locked on the page. Without a word, Liv sat beside her. "They don't get it," Astrid said after a long pause. "I talk to my dog, and he says I'm childish. I draw too much, and he says I'm wasting time. He tells me he loves me, but he doesn't see me." Liv looked toward the trees, snow clinging to their limbs like forgotten scarves. Ziva spent months looking for someone who loved her, someone who was already gone. Astrid's pencil stopped moving. She didn't know he was gone. She kept walking, sleeping in alleys, starving, waiting, but there was no one waiting back. Astrid's voice cracked. "That's worse than being alone." "Maybe," Liv said gently, "but sometimes, along the way, we find someone else." Astrid looked up at her, eyes glassy. "You mean like her finding you?" Liv smiled. "Maybe like you finding me." Astrid closed the sketchbook and leaned slightly against Liv's shoulder. Neither spoke for a long time. That evening, as the stars pricked holes in the black sky, Liv and Ziva sat by the fireplace. A new sketch had joined the others on the wall, Astrid's pencil drawing of Ziva standing at the base of a staircase, looking upward, waiting. Not at the door, but at the person who had just opened it. And for the first time, Ziva didn't sleep by the window. She slept beside Liv's bed. It was late afternoon when Liv Halldorson returned once again to the aging apartment block on Kullavagen. The snow had thinned now, replaced by patches of brittle grass and gray puddles reflecting the iron sky above. Ziva walked beside her, no longer hunched or hesitant, but steady, her tail swaying slowly like a silent metronome. The weight she had once carried in her body seemed to have shifted into something more internal, quieter but no less present. Liv had come with a purpose. There was one last thread from Arvid Nystrom's life she hadn't yet tugged: the mailbox. The building's interior still smelled faintly of varnish and damp plaster. At the end of the hallway near the stairwell, a row of old brass mailboxes clung stubbornly to the wall. Most had been relabeled with paper or tape, but near the bottom right, just below a row of scuff marks and paint chips, one still bore a tarnished nameplate: A. Nystrom. Liv hesitated before opening it. The latch clicked with surprising ease. Inside were only a few remnants: a junk flyer from a local hardware store, a faded postcard from a seaside town, and tucked at the back, pressed flat against the metal, an envelope, yellowed at the edges and addressed in a firm but slightly wavering hand: "To Ziva." Liv's breath caught in her throat. The paper was brittle but intact, folded once and sealed with a piece of old tape. The ink had bled in places, likely from humidity or tears. She opened it with care, her fingers trembling. Inside, written on lined stationery, was a single page in tight cursive. "Ziva, if you find this, and I don't know how you ever could, I want you to know that I never stopped looking. You were more than a dog to me. You were my compass, my shadow, my home. I'm sorry I lost you. I'm sorry I let them take you. But if you're out there and someone finds you, I pray they see what I saw. Not just a German shepherd, but a soldier, a sister, a life worth saving. Thank you for everything. And if you can't come back to me, find someone. Let them be your peace. Arvid. The letter didn't feel like it had been written in despair. It felt like something left behind with hope, a final mission passed on to someone else. Liv folded the letter and slipped it into her coat pocket. When she turned, Ziva was watching her with that quiet, patient gaze that seemed older than the dog's years. Her ears flicked, and Liv knelt beside her. "I think he'd be proud of you," she whispered, running a hand through Ziva's thickening fur. "I think he knew you'd keep going." That evening, Liv lit a candle and placed the letter on the mantel, beside the small ceramic bowl that had once held Ziva's first drink of water in her apartment. She stood in silence for a long time before speaking aloud. "Your name is Ziva, and you're staying here, with me." Ziva didn't bark. She didn't wag her tail. She just walked across the room and lay down at Liv's feet, resting her head on her paws. The decision felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, like gravity or memory. Ziva had come home, just not to the one she'd been searching for. At school the next day, Liv was surprised to see Astrid already seated when she entered the art room. The girl sat by the window, her braid falling neatly over her shoulder, her hands stained with charcoal dust. She glanced up only briefly before returning to her drawing. Liv approached without speaking. On the desk were several new sketches, all of Ziva. One showed her curled at Liv's feet, eyes half closed in comfort. Another had her standing in profile, a faint silhouette of a man in military uniform behind her, more memory than presence. In one drawing, Ziva stood on a snowy bridge, looking over the city. Her tail wasn't tucked anymore. "You've captured her spirit," Liv said softly. Astrid shrugged. "She has so many eyes." Liv raised an eyebrow. "Eyes? She sees everything," Astrid murmured, "but she doesn't always show it." There was wisdom in that comment that exceeded the girl's years. Liv sat beside her, noticing how relaxed Astrid's posture had become. There was less tension in her shoulders now, less hiding in her lines. "You've been drawing more," Liv said. Astrid nodded. My grandfather, let me keep a corner of the living room for my sketch stuff. He even asked me to draw his cat." She paused, then added shyly, "He said it looked like her, somehow." Liv smiled. Cats and shepherds, both stubborn in their own way. Astrid looked up. "Are you going to keep her?" "I already have," Liv said. "Her name's Ziva." The girl said nothing at first, but then very quietly she murmured, "That's the name I used in the dream, before I even knew it was real." Liv didn't reply. Some things didn't need explanation. Over the next few weeks, Ziva became a fixture in Liv's life, and gradually, the life of the school. On days when Liv taught only morning classes, Ziva waited patiently by the classroom door, occasionally drawing curious glances and quiet smiles from students. She never barked, never growled, just observed, with the silent dignity of one who had already walked through fire. Astrid began staying after school more often. Sometimes she and Liv painted in companionable silence. Sometimes they just sat on the bench outside the art room while Ziva dozed in the sun. Their connection was subtle, but unmistakable. The way Astrid reached instinctively for Ziva's ears. The way Ziva nudged her sketch pad when she stopped drawing. The way Liv sometimes caught herself watching them, girl and dog, feeling something very close to love. Not the loud, overwhelming kind, the quiet kind. The kind you find when you aren't even looking. One Friday afternoon, as the last bell rang and students scattered down the corridor, Astrid lingered in the doorway. "My mom's off tonight," she said. "She said she'd like to come meet you, and Ziva." Liv's heart stirred at the invitation. "I'd like that." Astrid smiled, small but real. "She says I've been lighter lately, like I'm not carrying so much." Liv looked at Ziva, who lay stretched out beneath the coat rack, content and still. "Maybe we both put some things down," she said. That night, as rain whispered softly against the windows, Liv sat with a warm mug in her hand, and Ziva's head resting on her knee. The letter from Arvid remained on the mantel, beside Astrid's newest drawing. Ziva, eyes closed, sleeping peacefully beside a fire. Beneath the sketch, in Astrid's careful script, were 5 words. She found someone, after all. The wind had shifted that morning, gentler than it had been in weeks. carrying with it the damp scent of thawing earth and something else that Liv Haldorsen could only describe as memory. It stirred the loose hairs at the nape of her neck as she waited on the bench outside her building, a gray wool coat pulled tight, her fingers curled around the handle of a thermos that had long since gone cold. Ziva lay at her feet as usual. She had grown healthier these last few weeks. Her ribs were no longer visible. Her coat had regained a faint sheen of gold beneath the black saddle of fur across her back. But her eyes still held that quiet weight, the kind that only time could soften. When the breeze passed, her ears twitched. She still listened for ghosts. At precisely 10 minutes past 11, a man turned the corner, walking at a slow but deliberate pace. Mikkel Forslund was in his early 70s, broad-shouldered and upright despite the cane he carried. His white beard was neatly trimmed, his long gray coat buttoned with military precision. A tweed flat cap sat atop his head, and under one arm he carried a worn leather satchel. "Miss Haldorsen," he greeted with a voice like gravel softened by age, "and this must be the soldier herself." Ziva stood as he approached, her tail low but wagging once. She sniffed the air, then took a cautious step forward. "She remembers me," Mikkel said with a small smile. "Not surprising. Dogs like her never really forget." Liv gestured to the bench. "Would you like to come in?" "Outside is fine," he said, lowering himself beside her with a stiff breath. "I like the air when it's full of stories." For a moment they sat in silence, the three of them forming a quiet constellation beneath the bare branches of the elm trees overhead. Then Liv spoke. "You knew Arvid?" Mikkel nodded. 40 years, give or take. We were stationed together back in Halmstad, border surveillance. He was calm, reliable, the kind of man you didn't need to watch because you always knew he was watching your back. "And Ziva?" "She came later," Mikkel said, eyes softening. "He adopted her after he left active duty. Said he needed someone who could keep up with him. They trained together every day. I saw them often, especially after my wife passed. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His loyalty lived in that dog." He opened his satchel and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a leather collar, faded but sturdy, with a metal tag still attached. The engraving was partially worn, but still legible. "Ziva. If lost, bring her home." "I found it in his things," Mikkel explained. "I was helping his niece clear out the apartment. Well, it didn't feel like something to throw away." Liv took the collar in both hands, running her fingers over the letters. She looked down at Ziva, now lying beside Mikkel's boots, her eyes half-lidded in the cold sun. "She's already home," Liv said quietly, "but I think she'd want this." With careful fingers, she replaced the simple nylon collar Ziva wore with the old leather one. It settled around her neck like something being returned to the earth. Mikkel watched in silence. Then he added, "He used to write letters to her, every night before bed. He had this battered old typewriter. Said it helped him sleep. Said if she ever came back, she deserved to know everything." "He never stopped believing she would," Liv murmured. "No," Mikkel agreed, "he didn't." They said goodbye shortly after. Mikkel walked back the way he came, his cane tapping a soft rhythm across the concrete. Liv watched him disappear into the turning of the street. That night, she sat by the fire with Ziva at her feet and the collar warm under her hand. She thought of letters written to no one, of a man who had spoken into silence, and of a dog who had listened somehow through the wind. Across the city, in the glass atrium of Lilleholm's Civic Arts Center, Astrid Brandt stood in a white blouse and black skirt, nervously adjusting the hem of her sleeves. Her long braid was neatly tied, and for once she had allowed a bit of blush on her cheeks. A hesitant attempt from her mother, who stood nearby holding a program and trying not to cry. The Children's Winter Gallery exhibition was in full swing. Paintings lined the walls, snowy landscapes, reindeer under moonlight, portraits of grandmothers in kitchens, stars over rooftops, and near the center, framed with pale wood and mounted slightly higher than the rest, was Astrid's piece. Dog in the Snow, Looking Toward the Window. Drawn in pencil and charcoal, it was stark, powerful. The dog stood with one paw lifted, eyes turned toward the warm light behind the glass. Inside the window, just barely visible, was a faint silhouette of a woman, hand resting on the pane, waiting. No title card explained the story. It didn't need to. When Liv arrived, she paused before the drawing longer than any other. Ziva had come with her, and the dog sat quietly beneath the frame, as though recognizing herself not only in the lines but in the space between them. Astrid approached hesitantly. "You came," she said. "I wouldn't have missed it," Liv replied. Astrid looked down. "My grandfather's here too, somewhere. He said it looked like Ziva had a voice in it." "She does," Liv said. "Through you." The girl flushed slightly. "I thought maybe after this we could make another one. Together. You and me, and her." Liv nodded. "That sounds perfect." Later, after the exhibition, they walked home together, Astrid between Liv and Ziva, their footsteps soft against the wet pavement. The city no longer felt heavy. It felt like it was finally exhaling. And when they reached Liv's apartment, the old leather collar caught the light of the hallway lamp, its engraving shining faintly in the still air. Ziva glanced back once at the door before stepping inside, as if finally understanding what Arvid had once hoped, that someone, somewhere, would bring her home. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and damp wool. Liv Halldorsen sat at the narrow table beside the window, tapping gently at the keyboard of her aging laptop. Outside, Lilleholm remained caught between winter's last breath and spring's first murmur. Streets streaked with slush, trees still bare but pulsing with the promise of buds. Ziva lay in her usual place near the radiator, her head resting on her front paws, eyes half closed as she listened to the rhythm of the keys. Liv's fingers hesitated above the screen. Then, exhaling slowly, she began to type. Her name is Ziva. She was left in the snow with no name, no collar, no voice. But she remembered where she came from, even when the world forgot. This is the story of a dog who never stopped waiting. And what happens when someone finally waits with her? It wasn't poetic, it wasn't polished, but it was honest. She uploaded the story to her modest personal blog, and then, impulsively, copied it into a post on a local community Facebook page. She attached a picture of Ziva lying on the living room rug, one paw curled, her eyes focused and steady. Liv stared at the screen for a moment before pressing share. Then she closed the laptop, rubbed her temples, and muttered, "Well, that's done." She hadn't expected anything to come of it. A few likes, maybe a comment or two. By the next morning, the post had over 3,000 shares. People from across the city, and then somehow, across the country, began to leave messages. Photos of their own rescue animals, stories of reunions and losses, simple notes that read, "Thank you for reminding us what loyalty looks like." The comment section filled with hearts and tears and prayers. Someone even turned Ziva's image into a minimalist sketch, reposting it with the caption, "She stayed." Liv was stunned. Then the packages began to arrive. First came a padded envelope from someone named Clara Rydin, a woman from Malmö who ran a small animal portrait studio. Inside was a charcoal drawing of Ziva, her gaze directed upward, snowflakes dotting her fur. A note was folded behind it. "I hope you hang this somewhere warm. She deserves it." Then came a stack of blankets from a dog training academy, food bags, collars, chew toys. One parcel simply read, "For the one who waited." Even more moving than the gifts were the letters, handwritten, typed, scrawled in blocky ink. Liv opened them carefully, one by one, at the table while Ziva watched from beneath the chair. But it was one envelope, plain and beige, with no return address, that made her pause. The handwriting was young, sharp, hesitant. Inside was a folded page and a photo of a boy, perhaps 17, with light brown hair and solemn blue eyes. He stood beside Arvid Nystrom in what appeared to be a family kitchen, a hand resting awkwardly on the older man's shoulder. "Dear Miss Halldorsen, my name is Elian Nystrom. Arvid was my great-uncle. I hadn't seen him in a few years. Family stuff, as people say. I always thought I'd have time to reconnect. I didn't know about Ziva. I didn't know she went missing. I didn't know he never stopped looking. I only knew he passed away with a lot of his life unspoken. Your story, it brought me to tears. I never met Ziva, but I can see now why he loved her. Thank you for loving her, too, for finishing a story I didn't realize I had begun. Thank you for staying when he couldn't. With all my heart, Elian." Liv pressed the letter to her chest for a long time before placing it beside Arvid's own message to Ziva on the mantel. She looked down at the dog now dozing on the rug, her tail twitching gently as though dreaming. "You were never really lost," Liv said, "just waiting for the rest of us to catch up." Meanwhile, in the quiet corners of a house a few streets over, Astrid Brandt had begun writing. She didn't call it a journal. Journals felt like something adults did to manage their days. No, this was something else. She wrote in a battered black notebook with a broken spine, the margins filled with small drawings, paws, eyes, tails that curled, faces pressed against glass. She titled the first page, "The Feelings of Animals No One Waits For." The entries were short, sharp, poetic, in a strange observational way. A dog that watches the door every time it creaks is not being disobedient. She is remembering the sound of someone who left. A cat who paces windows is not restless. He is practicing the path to someone who will never return. A pigeon that lands on the same windowsill each morning is not just a bird. He is a heart with wings, looking for the right direction. She shared one of the entries with Liv after school one afternoon, cheeks flushed as she passed over the notebook. "It's just something I do when my head gets noisy," Astrid mumbled. Liv read in silence, her eyes softening. "This is beautiful," she said. Astrid shrugged. "It's not a real story." "It's the kind of story we forget how to hear," Liv replied. Later that week, Liv brought Ziva to the local shelter, the very one she had once called on that freezing night. The staff greeted them like returning heroes. One of the volunteers, a round-faced man named Jonas, knelt to stroke Ziva's neck, smiling at the old collar with Arvid's engraving. "She's famous now, you know," he said. "You both are." Liv looked at the shelves now overflowing with supplies. People really responded. "They did," Jonas nodded, "because they needed something to believe in." Liv watched as Ziva sniffed a sleeping puppy through the bars of a kennel. The puppy's tail thumped once and then again. "I think we all did," she said. That evening back home, Liv lit the fireplace and sat down with a sketch pad. She hadn't drawn in months. Her own art had always been tangled in memory, in the weight of old dreams. But now, she found her hand moving freely, lines forming without resistance. She drew Ziva first, then Astrid. Then, finally, a door slightly ajar, with light pouring out. Not because someone had just left, but because someone had come in and stayed. And beneath the drawing, in her own quiet hand, Liv wrote, "The ones who wait aren't weak. They're the ones who still believe someone is worth returning for." The wind that carried into Lilholm that morning was nothing like the wind that had howled through its alleys months before. It was gentler now, scented faintly with thawing earth, rain-soaked bark, and the tentative bloom of crocuses pushing through softened soil. For the first time in a long time, the air no longer whispered of what had been lost, but of what was quietly returning. In the heart of the city's main park, just past the row of chestnut trees and the iron fence where ivy had begun to stir, Ziva bounded forward across the fresh grass. Her coat, now thick and gleaming in the sun, shimmered with gold and black as she darted through the patches of early wildflowers, her paws landing with joyful confidence. She no longer walked with the hesitation of memory. She ran like she belonged to the wind. Children on a nearby bench pointed and waved, their parents smiling softly behind them. A boy tossed a stick. Ziva chased it, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. Her ears flicked with alertness, her tail moved like a banner. Liv Haldorsen watched from beneath the low branches of a budding birch tree, her hands tucked into the deep pockets of her linen coat. She wore her hair down today, soft waves catching the breeze. The worry lines that once held residence on her forehead had begun to smooth, as though time itself had decided to let her breathe again. Beside her stood Astrid, clutching a small paper bag of seeds. The girl's cheeks were pink from sun and effort, her braid a little messier than usual. She wore a canvas apron with smudges of soil on the hem and a hand-drawn patch stitched near the front. A sketch of Ziva's silhouette with the word hope embroidered in faint sky-blue thread. "Do you think she remembers the winter?" Astrid asked, watching Ziva leap through the grass. Liv looked at the dog for a moment, then smiled. "I think she remembers the feeling, but not the fear." They left the park not long after, walking together toward Liv's modest house on the edge of the southern quarter. The path curved along rows of townhouses, many with small gardens now sprouting herbs, daffodils, and tulips from beds once frozen stiff. Birds chirped from telephone wires, and the city no longer echoed with the heaviness of silence. The backyard had changed too. Where there had once been dry soil and patchy grass, now stood a small, vibrant garden bordered by painted stones and wooden edging. Tulips swayed in neat rows. Lavender peeked out from behind rosemary bushes. A line of new seedlings, Astrid's careful planting, stood under protective mesh. Liv kneeled beside the rosemary bush and pushed back a few weeds. She wore thick gloves and a wide-brimmed hat that made Astrid smirk when she caught sight of it. "You look like a farmer in an art museum," Astrid teased. Liv raised an eyebrow, but smiled. "And you look like a poet pretending to be a gardener." "Touché." Ziva lay nearby on a patch of sun-warmed earth, tongue out, tail flicking lazily. Her eyes watched them, content and alert, but without tension. It was the look of someone who had found the thing they had spent their whole life chasing. That afternoon, Liv and Astrid erected a small wooden sign at the edge of the garden. The wood was cedar, weather-sealed, and hand-carved with a delicate line of paw prints that wrapped around the border like ivy. Together, they pressed it into the earth. On the face of the sign, carved with care and colored with soft blue paint, were the words, "Ziva, love is the road home." They stood in silence for a moment, the spring breeze brushing through their hair, the world steady and open around them. Later, after tea and planting and laughter, Liv found herself alone on the porch. The sun had slipped lower, casting the yard in golden light. She held a familiar envelope in her lap, its edges worn, its fold creased by time and rereading. Arvid's letter. She opened it once more, fingertips steady now. Her eyes moved across the page, lingering over each word. But for the first time, her vision didn't blur with tears. She read it as if it were a blessing passed from one heart to another, not a sorrow left behind. When she finished, she folded it gently and tucked it back into its cloth sleeve. Ziva was lying on the porch rug, her body stretched out, one paw draped across the wooden slats, eyes closed, but ears still alert. As Liv leaned over and brushed a hand across her back, Ziva stirred, looked up, and then, without hesitation, rested her head on Liv's foot. The gesture was quiet, final, complete. Liv looked down at her with a softness that bordered reverence. "You're home," she whispered. The breeze picked up just enough to ruffle the pages of a notebook left open beside the door. Astrid's. The latest entry read, "Some journeys don't end where they began. Some don't end at all. They change shape, become gardens, fireplaces, quiet porches. They become eyes that close only when they've seen enough to rest." That evening, as the last of the sunlight slipped across the rooftops and spring clung sweetly to every window, Liv sat in stillness. The world was quiet now, but not empty. Not anymore. And Ziva, her name still etched into the earth, into memory, into love, slept peacefully at her side, her breathing slow, even, and utterly content. Sometimes, God doesn't speak in thunder or miracles that split the sky. Sometimes, He whispers, in the trembling breath of a dog left in the snow, in the silence of a woman who chooses to stay when it would be easier to walk away, in the hand that reaches out, even when it's unsure what it's holding on to. Ziva wasn't just a rescue story. She was a reminder that even when we are forgotten by the world, we are never forgotten by God. That even when we are abandoned, broken, and waiting with no one left to wait for us, He sends someone, not always who we expect, not always when we expect, but exactly when our hearts are still enough to listen. In this life, we are all Ziva at some point, waiting behind the glass. But sometimes, we're also Liv, the one who opens the door. And maybe, just maybe, love itself is the road home. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share this story with someone who might need hope today. Comment below what it made you feel. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of healing and second chances. And may God bless you, your home, and the ones who are still out there, waiting to be found. You are seen. You are loved. You are never forgotten. Amen.